Air over Ottawa is cold and complicated today. Snow on the ground here. A major U.S. court ruling reshaping tariffs across the border. And, on the human side, new guidance for some Canadians crossing into the States. Later in the brief, I'll walk you through what the Supreme Court decision actually changes for Canadian exporters, and what still hasn't gone away. Ottawa first, and it's a winter true Tuesday. Expect about -18 to -13 degrees Celsius, with snow in the picture. And in Senators' world, the Olympic men's hockey final has become a bit of a locker room divider. USA over Canada, and plenty of happy for you but not that happy energy. A few players talked about how unusual it is to cheer hard for one flag while also backing teammates on the other side. The practical takeaway: those national team storylines don't end at the buzzer. They follow players back into the room and into the next stretch of the season. Now shifting from familiar to higher stakes, because what happened in Washington could ripple straight into Canadian invoices and supply chains. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that a key law, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, does not give the president authority to impose broad import tariffs. The case name is Learning Resources Inc. v. Trump, and the result is clear. Tariffs built on that IEEPA foundation are invalid. Here's the key point: this is not all tariffs are gone. It's the specific legal route for tariffs is blocked. U.S. Customs and Border Protection says it will stop collecting the IEEPA-based duties and deactivate the related tariff codes as of 12:01 a.m. Eastern on this Tuesday. CBP hasn't publicly explained why collections continued for several days after the Supreme Court ruling, and importantly for companies, it hasn't yet laid out the refund path in the initial message. That matters because the refund numbers could be huge. Economists estimate more than $175 billion in Treasury revenue from those IEEPA tariffs could be exposed to potential refunds, with gross collections estimated at more than $500 million per day while they were in effect. Whether every dollar is refundable and how quickly will depend on the claims process and any legal follow-on. Now, the next move. President Trump has announced a replacement global tariff, first floated at 10%, then raised to 15% under a different authority. And this is where Canada's immediate exposure becomes more nuanced. Why this matters locally. A lot of what Ontario and Quebec ship into the U.S. moves under CUSMA rules. The final regulations for that new 15% global tariff clarify that goods exempt under CUSMA remain exempt from the new global duty. So for many Canadian businesses, the initial reaction is relief. Because if your product qualifies under CUSMA, this replacement tariff is designed not to hit you. But the risk here is the stuff that sits outside that CUSMA umbrella, and the broader uncertainty that remains even if your product is compliant. There are still other tariff tools on the table that this Supreme Court ruling did not touch. Section 232 tariffs, justified on national security grounds. These have included major categories like steel, aluminum, and autos. Section 301 tariffs, tied to findings of unfair trade practices. Those remain in place. And there's a second layer: politics and negotiation. Multiple Canadian officials are reading this as a reminder that even when one tariff mechanism fails, Washington can pivot to another, and that the upcoming CUSMA review, expected in July, could become a pressure point. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford welcomed the court decision as a positive signal, but also warned that the U.S. has other tools and that uncertainty is still the operating condition. A related signal, worth keeping brief: the same U.S. policy volatility is showing up in energy investment. The Trump administration's posture toward offshore wind, plus stop work orders on several Atlantic coast projects, has chilled confidence in U.S. offshore wind, and provinces like Nova Scotia say they're seeing increased interest from developers looking north. That's an opportunity story, but it sits on the same foundation. Policy whiplash changes capital flows. Quickly, one more Canada-U.S. border note for certain travelers. Ottawa has updated travel advice urging First Nations people to carry a passport in addition to a secure status card when crossing into the United States. The federal guidance now emphasizes that acceptance of status cards is ultimately at the discretion of U.S. officials, and that status cards aren't accepted for air travel. Turning now to Canada's domestic policy file, there's pushback building around a few budget and affordability moves. In Ottawa, the budget implementation bill includes retroactive clauses affecting how veterans' benefits are calculated. Veterans advocates and the Veterans Ombud warn that retroactive changes could effectively legitimize past overcharges and could wipe out ongoing litigation. And on affordability, the federal government's rebranded GST credit top-up, now framed as a groceries and essentials benefit, would provide a one-time top-up this spring for current recipients, and then a 25% increase to GST credit payments for 5 years starting in July, with eligibility extended to about 500,000 more people. Critics argue it's targeted and temporary, and that many pressured households won't qualify based on income cutoffs. Act 3. What to watch next, and where uncertainty remains. On the U.S. tariffs, the next practical milestone is CBP's follow-up guidance, especially on refunds and the mechanics for importers who already paid IEEPA-based duties. If you're a Canadian exporter, the near-term question isn't just am I CUSMA exempt, but are my U.S. customers about to reprice, reorder, or delay while they wait for clarity? Also watch which authority the U.S. uses to sustain the new 15% global tariff, and whether legal challenges shift from IEEPA to whatever the replacement framework is. And for border crossings, if you or your family rely on status cards for land crossings, the updated federal language is a cue to plan for more discretion at the U.S. side and to travel with a passport when possible. That's the brief for Tuesday, February 24th. Stay warm out there, and we'll come back to the tariff details as the refund guidance becomes concrete.